Thank you very much, David. Thank you. I'm going to try to avoid this microphone. I'm a little afraid of it. I have fear of the microphone, but if I project enough, hopefully you'll hear me just fine. I would like to thank also Anthony for his great... That's Nick. All right. Well, you know, there's a similarity there. I can't place it, but it's there. His lovely friend Rachel Reich, who is a very, very fine host to me while I've been here. And I'd also like to thank David, who introduced me and who also helped to organize this conference. I'd also like to thank the gracious Ian Crane for lending me his remote thingy. I think that's the technical name for it, so I'll be using that as well to click along. I've been feeling for a long time that disclosure, or let's call it the end of the secrecy, is impossible, but it's also inevitable. It is a paradox. And hopefully I'll be able to explain to you why I think that's the case. There's a number of themes that I want to go into today, so that any kind of disclosure or openness or breaking out of the secret on this topic is going to have to deal with these various issues. First, it's going to have to deal with the very confrontational relationship that we have had with them, whoever them happen to be. And I'll explain that a little more. Second will be, because once a disclosure comes out, there'll have to be some kind of analysis of the vast illegal structure of secrecy as it has evolved over six or more decades to hide this. I mean, after all, if the President of the United States were to say, well, it's come to my attention that, you know, in fact, the UFO phenomenon appears to be real, and some of them are not us. You know, he would like to say, well, now I'm going on vacation for a few months, see ya, but that really won't be possible. There'll be follow-up issues, I'm sure. And so one of them is going to be, well, how have you kept this secret? And that's going to get into some very, very nasty little issues that will be difficult, I think, to avoid. The third issue is that disclosure, or the end of the secrecy will involve, will be an analysis and an understanding at some point of what the secret program really is about. I mean, what are they doing with all this secrecy? Are they building flying saucers, for example, and other things? The fourth thing, then you're going to have to ask, well, who are these other beings? What is that all about? Why are they interested in us, if they are? Yes, they certainly are, I think. And then I think what will happen is any kind of outing of this issue is going to present a risk and a great challenge. Think back to something, you know, one generation ago when Mikhail Gorbachev became head of the Soviet Communist Party in 1985. And it seemed great. Perestroika, glasnost, restructuring, openness. Wow. Anyone who was studying this at the time, and I think most of us were just blown away by this. But what happened? Well, 6 years later, there was no more Soviet Union. In other words, I think the process of reform spiraled out of his control, and I think that's child's play compared with what would likely happen in the event of true openness on this particular issue. Now, all of those, you know, would make you think, well, this is just such a difficult issue, and it's never going to, there's no incentive for the power elite to broach it. That's true, but it's going to happen anyway. I believe it's inevitable, and I hope to explain why I think that's the case. When I do any presentation anywhere, I never, ever want to assume that everyone is on my page. There are always people who say, you know, well, I think a lot of this UFO stuff is kind of not persuasive. What is your case? Why do you think that there's something valid to it? That's perfectly fair. You should always ask that question. In my own opinion, I think that the UFO phenomenon is very, very well documented. That doesn't mean it proves that it's an alien phenomenon, but it's certainly exceedingly well documented that we have something serious going on. This is my vote for maybe a top 15 or so documents that are all public domain. You can find them yourself, that Most of these are United States military and intelligence community documents dealing with really the impossible being here. So in other words, a lot of airspace violation documents, 1950 Hanford Atomic Energy Commission, just as one example, where they describe the Atomic Energy Commission's facility in Hanford, Washington State, was a big deal. And there is a situation where numerous round spherical objects were seen. The military brought out anti-aircraft battalions, fighter interceptors, alerted a whole range of agencies, and were unable to, at least in the one memo that we have, they were obviously concerned and they didn't know what these things were. That's one example. There's another, the 1952 CIA memo. This is a memo from the chief of scientific intelligence to the director of the CIA, describing objects of unknown origin at altitudes and speeds over sensitive installations of such nature that they are not attributable to natural phenomena or known aircraft, and things like this. You know, keeping in mind these are bureaucratic memos where they're not just going to come out and say, boss, I think we're being invaded, but they might as well. Some of these, the language in some of these is really, really very grave. Earlier today, a mention was made of the famous Malmstrom Air Force Base case in which a glowing red object was seen by above-ground personnel hovering over an area where there were 10 or 12 Minuteman missiles below ground, which all went offline. Bing, 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 one after the other. They were studied by Boeing, which was in charge of them. Boeing had absolutely no explanation as to how those could have gone offline as they did. They were offline for an entire day. And on and on. The famous Halt memo dealing with the Rendlesham case has certain key factual errors in it, but it's a fascinating and an important memo anyway, and it does confirm that some pretty strange stuff happened at a major base here in Britain. And as a matter of fact, we now know, we have absolute clarity, as Gary Hesseltine mentioned during one of his brief chat here. Colonel Halt has now formally acknowledged that the beams coming down from this object, actually, as Halt had said privately some years before, adversely affected the ordnance. That is, in other words, the nuclear weapons that were being stored there without knowledge of the public. Okay, so what's all that about? Well, you can argue over who's behind the UFO phenomenon, but even if you just take these 15 documents, I really don't think you can have any reasonable mind can argue that there isn't a phenomenon by an unknown entity with extraordinary technology that's just not supposed to exist. So then you can start with that. The frustration that I continually get when I hear these know-nothings get on TV arguing against all of this, and they immediately start with the stupidest objections, like, well, it's impossible for aliens to come here because they're too far away. You know, who's talking about that? All we should be dealing with is what we know is true. Start with empirical observation and take it from there. And then we can puzzle out the details. So anyway, this is my vote for top 15. You could come up with others that are equally good or maybe even a little bit better, but that's a good place to start. So the first real all of that's just a quick prologue to get that out of the way. There's been a long history of provocation and confrontation between the many militaries of the world and these objects. As I indicated, the open literature, some of the documents I just showed you, make this very, very clear that the United States, the UK, and all the major militaries of the world have handled this with very, very serious attention. There have been a long history of attempts to shoot down these unknown objects, as was mentioned earlier by Nick Pope in relation to Milton Torres. But that's one of many, many, many such cases, some of which were even more dramatic than that one. So whatever else is going on, there's trouble in paradise. I mean, in other words, any admission on the reality of this phenomenon is going to have to deal with the fact that we've been having some problems with these objects, whatever that is. Okay? Something's not right. This is just way too many for me to go through. All of this is in my next book, and there's the cover of my next book. I'm happy to say when it comes out, that's what it will look like. all of these, I think, are pretty nicely dealt with. So in other words, some interesting military encounters with UFOs of the 1970s. You know, some of these are just phenomenal. The Iranian case is probably the most, I think, famous of them. I've been on coast-to-coast radio a few times with George Norrie, and the last time I was on, George came out of the blue and said, "Well, Richard, what do you think is the strongest and best UFO case of all?" Caught me a little off guard, but I said, well, I think the Iranian case, actually, it's got fabulous documentation from the United States Defense Intelligence Agency. It's got a tremendous amount of personal testimony from the pilots and one of the pilots involved. It even has confirmation by the United States satellite system known as the DSP satellites, the Defense Support Program.